For Zoom, I want you to remember that it is going to record over your internet. So if your guest has shoddy internet, you're not going to be able to get a good quality audio experience for your listeners, and it might go in and out with the audio. Also, if your internet is shoddy, then it's going to do the same thing. If you do decide to use Zoom, which several of our clients do, and there aren't really a lot of big issues with that, you'll want to make sure that you are recording the audio on separate files. Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today, we are talking about launching a podcast in our Tech Tips series. This is our last one. Oh no, that's okay. You guys can keep listening to the general podcast episodes for tips, tricks, and strategies to turn your listeners into leads. But I at least wanted to give you some technical support and encouragement. I know that that is sometimes the reason why some of us don't launch a podcast. And so I want you to take that step, do the thing, and let me know when you do, because I love cheering you on and I love seeing you guys take action and make changes in your podcast. I recently had someone reach out and say that they changed one thing in their podcast and it has made such a difference. And oh, that makes me so excited. Like it really does. I love seeing that. All right, so today we're talking about launching a podcast. We're going to start with our podcast launch checklist. This is going to allow us to kind of go through each of the things that you're going to need to get or consider or things you're going to need to do as you are launching your podcast. So hopefully this will help you. We're going to talk tech as we go through it, some gear you're going to need, as well as some of my favorite ones that you can use and my favorite recommendations. So the first thing in the podcast launch checklist is coming up with your concept. Your concept is going to include things like clarifying your goals, message, and audience, writing that podcast description. Before you do that, you're going to need to know what your podcast is about. So when you're clarifying your goals, your message, your audience, writing that podcast description, you're going to want to go back to episode 22, where we talked about the importance of podcast market research and how to do it. I actually run through an example of me trying to create a podcast about being a dog trainer and creating a podcast for those that would need my services. So you can go listen to that and kind of get a better idea of coming up with your concept and then coming up with your description. That's going to help you do that. Next, you're going to choose your podcast format. This is usually solo, interview, or hybrid, but there's a little more that goes into this that you can find on episode 36, which talks about how to choose a podcast format. And it's really about just finding what's going to work best for you. You can have a co-hosted show, or you can decide on the length of your show. What is your own capacity for being able to create new content on a regular basis? How often do you want to podcast? Those are all things that you're going to want to consider as you're picking your format. So go back and listen to episode 36 to hear more about the strategies behind choosing a podcast format, but that's going to be next in your steps. And if you're like, wait, Alicia, you're moving too fast and I'm not able to keep track of this, you can get this checklist for free. And I have it in my podcast launch workshop. And it has the checklist. It's got an equipment checklist as well. And by the time this goes live, it will have an updated workshop. So the one that was created there was from going on 2 years ago. So I want to make sure that you have updated content, and that will be updated by the time this episode goes live. And again, it is for free. So if you are thinking about launching a podcast, go check out that free training. You can find it on my website, and we'll have the link for that in the show notes. Next, you're going to want to choose a podcast host. There are plenty of podcast hosts out there. As you know, if you have been listening to this podcast for any amount of time, Buzzsprout is my favorite. There are obviously other ones that you can use. And I get this question a lot of, should I use Anchor? It's free. I personally don't like the idea of using a podcast host that is owned by a podcast streaming service. It just feels like too many eggs in one basket for me. I'm an Enneagram 1, right? We've talked about this before. I like to be safe and I like to kind of have control over things and control over my content. And I don't always feel like that's the case with something like Anchor. Just my opinion and from what I've seen. So that's why I like Buzzsprout. You own your content. They're not owned by some third-party podcast listening app conglomerate. They have incredible service, incredible user experience, and their community is wonderful. So I like them for my podcast host of choice. Next, you're going to want to come up with a name for your podcast. Now, this can be done during your market research, but it's good to kind of ruminate on this for a while. Do some research, look and see if there are any other names that are out there for the type of content you want to create, and if someone is already producing a podcast by that name. Next, you're going to want to create the podcast art and then select 3 to 5 subtopics for your podcast, or as I like to call them, your content buckets. This will allow you to know exactly what it is that your podcast is going to be about. And with that, we have completed the concept phase of launching your podcast. Next, you want to get some microphone and gear and equipment. So you can purchase a microphone, a pop filter, and some headphones. I like and use the Samson Q2U. It is a USB microphone. I recommend it to all of my clients. I think that it's a fantastic mic, and I personally think that the quality is better than the more popular one, the Blue Yeti. You'll just want to make sure that you have it facing you and that you are in a quiet space, since it picks up noise very clearly, but you just want to make sure you're in a quiet space. You're not, banging your microphone or anything like that, and that should be fine. For headphones, I usually just go with some type of wired headphone. You're going to want to record some type of recording tool. Audacity or GarageBand are free to use. I use Audacity since I am a Windows user, and I like them. I've used them for a very long time. We're going on 4 years now of using it for audio, so highly recommend, and the ease of use is just fantastic. There's always something to learn on it, but for someone who's even just starting out and has a general idea of technology, it's not that complicated. You're going to also want to set up some type of virtual recording interview account. Most people will use Zoom. For Zoom, I want you to remember that it is going to record over your internet. So if your guest has shoddy internet, you're not going to be able to get a good quality audio experience for your listeners, and it might go in and out with the audio. Also, if your internet is shoddy, then it's going to do the same thing. If you do decide to use Zoom, which several of our clients do, and there aren't really a lot of big issues with that, if you do use Zoom, you'll want to make sure that you are recording the audio on separate files. There's a settings under recording. You should be able to click it and it just says record a separate audio file for each person who talks. And that should fix that issue. And that way, if you do talk over your guest or you find yourself fumbling over words together, then it's a very easy way to edit and clip or mute anything in the interview. So that way it doesn't feel like you guys are talking over each other. For another virtual interview platform I've used Riverside for about a year now, and I really like them a lot. Zencastr is another one that is fantastic. I personally like Riverside because I can see the other person. I know Zencastr has some newer features where you can see the person, but I like Riverside since it allows you to stream your interviews if that is something that you like to do. From here, you're going to want to test and practice with your equipment a max of 3 times. Don't go more than 3. And that is me, a fellow perfectionist, telling you that. I know that you can get caught up and say, it's not perfect yet. Record a few times, try it out, and see what is working and what's not. From there, you're going to want to plan out your episodes. So start brainstorming 10 plus podcast episodes. If you're struggling with figuring out what those first or next 10 podcast episodes are, you can go back to episode 24, where we talked about planning out the first or next 10 episodes of your podcast. That should help you with the planning. Also, if you've already done that market research, that should help you as well. So start brainstorming, get those 10 podcast ideas at least down on paper or into your project management tool, and you should be good to go. Choose what those first 5 episode ideas are going to be. This is going to be really good because most people start the podcast from the very beginning. They won't start with the most recent episode. So with that in mind, you want this content to be really important, basic, cornerstone content that you can always go back to, content that is going to always be relevant to your audience and is going to be evergreen. So keep that in mind as you pick which ones are going to be your first 5 episodes. Pitch some guests for interviews if that's what your format is going to be. Script or outline your first episode content. This is going to be determined on whether or not you feel more comfortable with a script or an outline, or if you just like to wing it. So keep that in mind. Know yourself, know what works best for you as you are planning out your podcast episodes. Script and record your intro, your outro, and any ads that you want in your podcast, and then go ahead and record that first episode. So that is the planning phase. Next, we're moving on to an episode level planning. You're going to want to pick some theme music. I like to use neosounds.com for picking out my music. That way I know it's licensed and it's good for 5 million downloads. You're going to want to edit your podcast episode, export the audio, and then upload it to your hosting platform along with those show notes. So we talked last episode about systems and streamlining your podcast workflow. So go back and listen to that if you're kind of trying to figure out what to do on an episode level, but that should help you get started with that. But still, we're just going to keep going through that podcast launch checklist. For the marketing, you're going to want to create your podcast graphics. And we talked about this in episode 23, how to create a podcast launch plan. We talked about the marketing side and how important it is and to not wait until the last minute, like, ooh, something's coming. I know, I just sang that for y'all. You're welcome. We don't need to do that. Let your audience know what is coming. Get them excited about that stuff too. We want to make sure that they are excited, that they're lined up and ready to listen, and that you're not getting crickets on launch day. Create a website or a landing page based on your podcast and surrounding that, getting people excited, getting people's email list, however you want to use that email strategy. Use SEO to name your podcast episodes. You can go back to our episode we just did 2 episodes ago, which was episode 46, which is SEO for your podcast. And that should help you figure that out and get that kind of streamlined and organized on your side to ensure that all of your episodes are titled appropriately. Then you're going to want to submit your show to all major and minor podcast listening apps. It's important that they're not just on Spotify and Apple Podcast. You're going to want to make sure that people can listen wherever they like to listen. Moving on to our last section in the podcast launch checklist, you're going to want to publish the trailer and 3 episodes to go live on launch day. Email your email list, let them know, get them excited. Hey, things are live. Post on social media, tell a family member or a friend. Have a dance party because you just did something absolutely incredible. Send Alicia a DM so she can have a dance party with you. I know I just talked about myself in the third person. It's okay. But seriously, send me a DM. I want to celebrate with you. And then start working on that next episode. So that is our podcast launch checklist. Those are some very basics. Like, here's what you need. Here's the tech that you need. Here's how to get started. Again, make sure that you go back, really, if you're going to go back and listen to an episode, go back and listen to episode 23, where I talk about how to create a podcast launch plan. That's going to go through those 2 months of launch and what you need to be focusing on during those 2 months. I don't want to add that in here because this one's more tech side and general information that you're going to need and things to consider as you are launching. But go ahead, go back and listen to that episode. Let me know when you launch your podcast because I want to shout you out. I will happily share it with my audience, letting them know that your podcast is finally out in the world and to give you a party, happy dance virtually. Yes, let's do it. Again, if you guys are looking for more support around launching your podcast, I got you. Yes, we do launch podcasts within our agency, but we also have podcast launch VIP days. If you're just like, look, Alicia, I can do the tech and I can do that stuff. Just help me plan it out. Give me some market research. I don't want to have to do the market research and help me plan out those episodes. Answer any questions I have. I'm here to help you and support you in any way possible. So we do have those available. You can send me a DM. Let me know that you're interested and we can chat further about it. All right. Have a fantastic week and I will catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.